Hello, Facebook and YouTube. Welcome to Wine Cellars Wine Weekend. We have 2 rounds today, so this is round 2 for us. Welcome from Chicago. My name is Lee Schlesinger. I'm Vice President at Wine Cellars in charge of portfolio management and education. And again, in this role, I get to have some good fun with these virtual tastings. The second tasting for today is with some relatively new friends. They only go back about 8 years, but what great friends to have. We have with us our Quinta De La Rosa and the owner, Sophia, as well as her brother, Philip, who co-manages the estate with her. I visited the property in 2018, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Douro Valley, and it's just absolutely amazing. So in order to try to bring you there as much as possible, we're going to use some images because it's just breathtaking. It's it's maybe tied for first the most amazing terroir backdrop for vineyards I've ever seen in my life. So to try to help illustrate that, I'm going to take up about 4.5 minutes of our time before we pull in Sophia and Philip and show a little video just so you guys can get a sense of what we're talking about because the place is so unique. So bear with me while we show you a little video.
We are producers of top quality port and wine for the Douro Valley, right next to Pinhão. La Rosa has been in our family for generations. My ancestor, Dietrich Voigerd, originally came from Hamburg in 1815. He started a shipping company called Voigerd's, buying and selling port. Quinta De La Rosa was given to my grandmother Claire as a christening present over 100 years ago. What a christening present. Most people are lucky to have a pipe of port in those days. Unfortunately, Albert, who built Val do Inferno vineyard with those amazing terraced walls, fell into difficulties in the 1930s. So he was forced to sell the shipping company to Barros. From the 1930s, we sold grapes to Crofts and to Sandeman, and effectively we were fruit farmers. It was only in 1988 that we started making our own port under our own label. My father, Tim, and I set up on our own thanks to changes in the port wine regulations. It meant that we could set up as a small producer, selling directly from our vineyard in the Douro. Port is a very branded product. And so in the early 1990s, we became one of the first producers to make wine in a commercial way out of port grapes. It was an overnight success. And now 2/3 of our production is wine rather than port. Both are very important, but port, after all, is at the heart of the Douro Valley.
I'm making wines at La Rosa since 2002, and I'm very lucky to work here because Quinta de La Rosa is a beautiful property. It's in the heart of Douro, in Pinhão, and we have vineyards near the river and also in altitude in the mountains, north facing, south facing. So we only have top quality grapes, but with very different character, with ones more freshness, others with more concentration. Here at La Rosa, we make all the styles of port: white, tawnies, rubies, 10-year-old, 20-year-old, finest reserve, LBV, vintage, all the styles. And the same philosophy that you use in wines, we use the same in ports. We try to make port wines with lots of character, but more elegant. We have a slightly drier style because we want really the freshness to come out in the wines. And in the tawnies, because we age the wines in Douro, they tend to be a little more strong, more concentrated than the other tawnies that are aged in Gaia with more humidity and with less evaporation.
La Rosa is built on a steep hill, and we're lucky we can use gravity where possible, so the grapes aren't damaged too much by pump movement. We control everything from the vineyards to bottling the final product. We also practice sustainable agriculture. We try to enable the grapes to express themselves in the bottle. The La Rosa Douro Red was the first Portuguese wine to be chosen for the Harrods Christmas Pampers. We're very lucky with our location, sitting right on the banks of the River Douro. We get the cooler morning sun. We are also easily accessible, only being 2 kilometres from Pinhão, which makes La Rosa an ideal place to visit. We welcome guests and have many guest rooms, as well as 2 houses we rent out situated on the middle of our vineyards. We also offer daily tours and tastings.
So I hope you guys enjoyed that. It gives great visual context for what we'll talk about here. We do have some PowerPoints. We'll talk about some maps and that kind of stuff. But let's introduce right now Sophia. Sophia, welcome.
Hello, Lee. It's very nice. This is my first Facebook Live online tasting. It's a very exciting experience to be here in Europe while you're in Chicago. And I guess it's probably the sign of times to come, unfortunately.
Well, if we can't connect, there is an ocean between us either which way. So we are connecting virtually here today. So thanks for joining us.
Not at all. It's my pleasure.
Why don't you give us a little background on maybe we saw some of that stuff in the video. But I think it's good to understand some context and maybe the history and how far your family goes back, and then maybe how Quinta De La Rosa comes into the family.
Yeah, I think it's people find it extraordinary to think that our family arrived from Germany over 200 years ago in 1815, and we're pretty English. So I always say we're like a good bottle of wine. We're a very good blend of different places around Europe, being German, French, English, and being in Portugal for 2 centuries. But anyway, so our German ancestors arrived in Portugal in 1815, and we've been in the port trade one way or another ever since. As people, if they had listened to the video just now, heard, we have had our ups and downs. Our great-grandfather Albert went bankrupt in the early 1930s. And I must say the times that we're coping with at the moment make me a little bit nervous about what's to come. But I hope we've learned from history. And then my grandmother, whose vineyard, Quinta De La Rosa, she'd been given it as a christening present over 100 years ago. She then took over, and she actually lived on the property for a good 20 years in the days that the Douro was very, very remote. Nowadays, it's just over an hour by car from Oporto. In those days, you had to go by train, and it took a good 4 hours, and there were unmade roads. So it was pretty remote. My father then took over on my grandmother's death, and we then decided as a family to start making port under our own label in 1988, because before that we'd been growing grapes and selling them to Sandeman. So it's kind of strange. We're young, but yet old. So we've got a lot of tradition, a lot of family, many generations of being involved in the port trade. But effectively, we started under the guidance of Tim, my brother and my father, in 1988, 30 years ago. And it's been quite a journey. It's been tough. I think there's that saying, if you want to start with, if you want to have a small fortune, you start with a large one and you buy a vineyard. Well, we didn't even have to buy the vineyard, but we had all the problems associated with launching a new brand onto the marketplace.
A labor of love.
A labor of love, but as I hope people can see from those pictures, it is arguably the most beautiful wine region of the world.
Yeah, really hard to argue it, but let's get a little more context. We've got some historical context. Let's get some, I'm a map guy, so I like to take a look at where we are in terms of geography. So I'm going to pull up a little PowerPoint here. We'll try not to crush you with too much information, rather some emotive images, but I think it's important to understand where we are, the soil, the climate, and because it defines what it is that you're doing there. So we're going to pull that into the stream here. Bear with me 1 second. And there we go. So we're going to take a look at the map here, and we have a map on the left there of Portugal, and you can see that on the far left would be our Atlantic Ocean, and at the top you see Vinho Verde, which is that yellow, and Vinho Verde is defined by a very Atlantic influence, but as you move inland, you get sort of towards the high plains, like the high plains of Spain, but it becomes more continental and hot. And on that right side, if I can get my cursor working, so you see Oporto here, which would be kind of the equivalent of here. And it works its way kind of reverse if you went upriver into the Douro Valley that borders Spain here. And kind of, I like talking about it like Mama Bear, Papa Bear, and Baby Bear, and that the lower portion here tends to be cooler and wetter, and then the upper portion, Alto Douro, tends to be almost too hot and dry, and you're here at Baby Bear, which is kind of the perfect balance between hot and arid upper Douro, and then the lower Douro here, where it tends to be cooler and wetter. So the town you're in is just outside of Pinhão, which is where my cursor is there, and where the big arrow is there.
That's right. You've got it pretty well. So we're in the Douro region is divided into three, and the cooler, slightly wetter region is called Baixo Corgo, which is quite confusing. Corgo is a river, and anything below the river, closer to the sea, has more rainfall. We're in the rain shadow area, so we're acima, which means above in Portuguese, Corgo, the river. We're above the Corgo River, and that's the kind of the heart, the central part of the port region. And then you've got the Douro Superior, closer to Spain, where it is very, very hot and very dry and very arid. And we have a second vineyard there, called Passagem. But today we're focusing on Quinta De La Rosa, which is in the heart of the port region. And many people don't know this, Lee, but the port grapes are classified. So a lot of people know about the first growth in Bordeaux and Premier Crus and Grand Crus and everything. In the port region, the classification is very easy. It's A to F, and A being the best quality. And we're very fortunate. We have our vineyards are all classified A, so we have some of the best vineyards possible.
That's right. Cool. Let's take a look at the where we are there. Even this in Cima Corgo, that area where you are. I like this because it gives you an idea of that hot, dry continental climate that we're talking about. If you take a look at kind of the scrub brush and the road and how dry and kind of like sandy it is there.
Yep, it's very, very dry. I mean, we get, I don't know what millimeters are in anyway, but we get 800 millimeters of rain a year, which is kind of very arid. And we get these extremely hot 100-degree Fahrenheit and more summers. So it's very hot and very dry.
And then the other thing for me that strikes me is the uniqueness of the soil, which is kind of what this next slide shows. This is the schist that is above kind of the granite subrock, but very schisty, inorganic materials, compressed rock schist.
I find it extraordinary sometimes to think the vines can survive in almost rock. I mean, we don't really have much soil, and you see these incredible vines with their very, very deep roots, as you can see in that picture, surviving with rock, and you can see the rock behind that photo. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, so I think that brings us to the next slide, which is what grape varieties actually exist in that hot, arid, dry climate that's digging through that schist. And these are two of your major varieties that you guys like, and I liken Touriga Nacional to maybe the Cabernet Sauvignon of Portugal, kind of the most noble grape that you guys have. But how about your impressions?
Well, I think, the reality is these grape varieties have developed over the centuries. We think that the Romans brought the grapes in from Italy or wherever, and they've gradually developed over the centuries. Maybe there were vines before that. And the most important thing is that these vines can survive in the heat and arid conditions. Touriga Nacional is definitely our best quality grape that we have. It's very intense flavors, very fruit driven, quite high alcohols, but in particular, it's quite a difficult grape variety. It's quite low yielding, but it's our favorite. But I also very much believe in having many grape varieties in a mixed blend. And here at La Rosa, we tend not to produce wines just from one grape variety. The grape varieties for the port region have been developed with the idea of blending. And in fact, my brother and my great-grandfather, Albert, planted the vineyards at Quinta De La Rosa, very much mixed field planted with that in mind. So we mustn't forget about the other grape varieties, such as Torrega Franca, which, for instance, gives us a little floral element and a little bit of freshness to the Torrega Nacional, which can be very, very jammy and fruit-driven, but beautiful as well. Often blending in the Douro is better than single monocasts.
Yeah, for sure. The art of blending is something that the Bordelais use frequently. So we think about those wines, and the same concept applies here. Is that we have one wine that may bring structure, maybe a good tannin or color, another one that will bring more acidity, another one that will bring aromatics. So the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Absolutely.
Well put.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's take a look at what the estate looks like next. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the house and kind of layout, and we have a vineyard map coming up shortly. We can talk about your 55 hectares of A-rated vineyard sites, but get a little
We're
background.
very lucky. Firstly, we're right on the River Douro. It's the most beautiful region, as I hope the slides will show you. But we're also very lucky because we get the morning sun. So this enables our ultimate wines to have this freshness. The minerality comes from the schist soil or rock that you showed earlier. But also we're very lucky because we have the morning sun, so it doesn't get too hot. And we're also incredibly fortunate because this was our grandmother Claire's house that she lived in for, as I said, 20 years. So the house is almost like a museum. It's full of beautiful antique furniture, lovely family portraits. And it has a very, very special feeling for us as a family. It's where we gather, have family occasions, and it's a very important part of our lives.
And then the vineyards themselves, as I mentioned, you've got 55 hectares, which is 125 acres or more, 130, 135 acres. But they're scattered kind of across a wider area. And why don't you tell us the reason for that and maybe some individual characteristics?
I think everybody knows about terroir. And what we have here is terroir mixed with microclimates. So we're very lucky is that every vineyard has a slightly different aspect. So the higher up ones, up at Lamellas, which are shaded blue, have a higher altitude, so they're slightly more fresher. We even have some north-facing vineyards, which is good for us because of the heat. And then if you go down to the river, the far pink one, this is a great map that my brother did, Val do Inferno, is, as it says, Inferno, as hot as hell. It's very, very hot there. So you get the incredible intensity of flavors coming from the Val do Inferno vineyards. So this map shows that we've got incredible diversity. And that means, again, we can blend up some really, really interesting wines and ports from the diversity we have just on a single estate.
And let's take a look at kind of the two counterposed points that we talked about here. This is a nice shot of Val do Inferno.
Yep, they're both those two are Val do Inferno, and I think you can see the sheer size of the walls. These are dry stone terrace walls that Albert built just before the First World War, and they have ramps between them. And in those days, the way he was mechanizing was obviously not with actual machines, but with mules. So the mules managed to walk up the ramps, and they were then used to cart the grapes and also to plough, and some beautiful old steps as well, connecting the terraces to each other. It is the most stunning vineyard, and apparently it has some of the highest walls in the Douro, and was one of the reasons the Douro was made a UNESCO World Heritage Site, because it sits very proudly over the River Douro.
Yeah, that's when I was there, it was breathtaking. I have a couple other pictures that I want to show, but maybe before we get there, maybe it's time to taste a little wine.
I'm very thirsty, and I've got the glass here, and I'm ready to go.
All right. Well, let's try a little bit of the Douro Rosa, and tell us kind of the concept behind the wine, and then we'll taste it.
So we have several different red wines, and the Douro Rosa is our kind of fresher, non-oaked wine. It is a beautiful summer wine, and in fact, we're here about to have a barbecue. So I'm very glad that I'm opening it now, because it's a wine that has, as you can see, incredible color. Douro Rosa, the name, can you see it? The label, yeah, is a red rose, and it's a play on Douro and Quinta De La Rosa, Douro Rosa. And it's really our kind of everyday go-to wine. It's I think it has the most incredible fruit that you get from the Touriga Franca and Touriga Nacional grape varieties. I get kind of almost kind of violet kind of floral element to it, as well as dark red berry flavors. And what I particularly like on the palate is that there's this incredible freshness and minerality. So it's a red wine that you can drink in the summer, slightly chilled. You can have it with a barbecue when you're grilling meat outside, but you can also have it in the colder months. In Portugal, we eat a lot of bacalhau, which is the salted cod. And traditionally, the Portuguese will drink red wine with their fish, and this is a perfect red wine for fish as well, for slightly meatier fish like cod.
Yeah, for me, I get that telltale sign. For me, Touriga Nacional screams black cherry, and I get so much deep brooding kind of black cherry, this rich intenseness, even on the nose and on the palate. And then I think that the Touriga Franca does bring some fun aromatics into it. But the wines, that's almost easy to do. It's not easy to do, but it's almost easy to do. What you have is another dimension here in the Douro, and especially in your wines, is that layer of minerality, which is another complexity that when you get wines this ripe, you tend to lose that kind of minerality. So you're still giving that terroir on top of the richness that is the heat. As well as the minerality that is the soil.
I couldn't agree with you more, and you know, that minerality and freshness really comes through with the Douro Rosa. And the one person we must mention here, who's not on the Facebook Live, is George Moreira, our winemaker, and he joined La Rosa in 2002, and our wines have got better and better ever since. I always use the restaurant analogy. A lot of people can open a restaurant and maybe cook quite well, but the difference between that and having a Michelin star is huge. And George is undoubtedly our Michelin star, I would argue, our 3 Michelin star chef. He's the most fabulous winemaker, and he really understands about the terroir. He understands about minerality. He understands about freshness. There are a lot of wines in the Douro that are very good, but they're just a different style. They're much more fruit driven. They've got much more oak, and they're very, very intense. We make wines that are really good food lovers wines. They match food fantastically. Having said that, I'm very happy to drink this without food. Cheers.
Cheers. Let's keep going on a little my personal pictures. So when I was there at the estate in August of 2018, I managed to take, there's another great picture from you guys, give you an idea of the scope and the scale, the effort that it took. And what year was that constructed by your grandfather?
Before the First World War, so about 1915-16.
And dry stone terraced walls. Wow.
They are very tall.
So this is a picture that I took, obviously. But I took it on a 45-degree angle. So you have.
Were you lying down?
Yeah.
Have you had too much to drink, Lee, when you were taking this photo?
The sun was up, probably.
It's a very good photo.
But yeah, so it's taken on that 45-degree angle. But here's I think even more of a dramatic picture, standing next to the wall that's maybe anywhere from 15 to 30 feet high next to you, with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 rows max of vines before you see another wall of that height. It's a little unnerving. And if you tried to walk up those slate stairs that jut out from the side, you wouldn't want to do it in a laying down condition.
Definitely not. The other thing about these walls, you can see your picture, the wall's slightly bulging, which is slightly concerning because when these walls fall down, they cost at least $15,000-$20,000 to rebuild. So they're expensive. It's kind of like a museum piece, Val d'Inferno. We keep it for the beauty and the history.
So we shouldn't play Jenga with the stones.
Please no, don't.
Okay.
We might get a rather large bill at the end.
Understood. Well, let's as a counterpoint to this, let's go higher up in altitude, 500 meters or so. Whoops. So about 15 up. You go from river altitude up here to 1,500 feet above sea level or so.
Absolutely. This is the top of our vineyard called Quinta De La Rosa. We have the most beautiful house that people rent with a swimming pool, and it has fantastic views. And this is where a lot of our red wine comes from the Douro, as well as the La Rosa Estate Red, which is the next one you'll be tasting.
Yeah. Before we get there, I just wanted to show again what my personal photographs reveal. And this is pretty much from right where we were talking about. I believe your house is off to the right here. That's as you're right. Looking at it. But what struck me, I believe that these plantings over here are yours.
Yeah.
And they're north facing.
Yeah.
So they're intended to be planted with white varieties to protect from the sun on that north facing slopes.
Yeah, right at the top, we're actually planting a lot of white grape, though white wines have become very, very popular in the Douro because of this minerality. It surprises people and the freshness. And one of the grape varieties we've been planting here is the Alvarino Grape, which is interesting because the Alvarino Grape normally comes from Vinho Verde and from Rias Baixas, which is along the coast. And it was only approved quite recently for the Douro region to be able to plant Alvarino. And George Moreira, our winemaker, has his own vineyard, Poeira, and he's had great success with his Alvarino. So we've planted some Alvarino. It'll be very interesting to see.
And I want to get, you start to lose perspective on the scope and scale of what we're talking about. And here's some contour planting. But here's a picture that I kind of wanted to show of that site that we were looking at in that last picture off to the right. And up at the top is what you're talking about. You can even see it's protected from the sun partly here.
That's right.
But if you look here, you see this road, and these are drainage pipes down there.
Yep.
And those drainage pipes are, what would you say, diameter or size?
Oh, I don't know. They're quite large because we get when it rains, it's quite torrential. So we have to make sure we have good drainage because otherwise there would be terrible erosion.
So a meter or two in terms of diameter?
Oh yeah, at least I would say meter and a half.
Yeah. So if you get that kind of, it's 6 feet. So a human could be standing maybe inside the drainage, just to get an idea of the kind of the scope and the scale. These drainage pipes down here are actually these little teeny things on this road here. So when you scale that up, it's a monumental task of digging into that steep slope.
Absolutely.
So I think that's what we wanted to show. Maybe we'll talk about, we're about to get to some barriques, which probably brings us into the estate La Rosa wine.
Yeah, then I think you were going to try to bring my brother in here, were you?
Yeah, there's the barrel room. We'll talk about barrel aging and a little bit. So let's track down Philip, see if he's backstage. Philip, how are you, my friend?
Hi, Lee. Been entertained by your chat with Sophia. Welcome.
I'm glad.
and I've been enjoying some wine.
Excellent. Well, that's what we're all here to do, as well as everybody out there in Facebook land. So you're both in the UK currently and tasting some wine. And we've tasted as you saw, we tasted the De Rosa Red. Why don't you introduce kind of the concept of the La Rosa estate wine and maybe give us your impressions on that wine?
Yes, I mean, the La Rosa estate wine is most probably our main product. We produce more of this wine than anything else. It comes mainly from the Lamella's vineyards, which is what you were describing with my sister earlier on. So from the higher altitude vineyards. It's slightly older vines than from the De Rosa, a bit more Touriga Nacional, which is our sort of favorite grape variety, but it is still a blend. However, the big difference is that we put a bit of aging, a bit of oak aging. Now, this is not new oak. This is secondhand oak. We use barrels which have been, first of all, used for our reserve wines, and then we cascade them down to our red wine. This wine is still got all those flavors, that minerality, that the violets coming from the Touriga Franca, but it's just got a bit more sophistication. It's got a bit more depth now. The vines are a bit older. They're adding a bit more sophistication, but you're also getting a slight sort of hint of oak coming through. It's not powerful. It's not overbearing on the nose. And this wine, I'm actually drinking the 2017. It's ready to drink after it's been bottled. It's been in an oak barrel, secondhand oak barrel, for about 9 months, and then it's bottled in end of October of the following year.
Yeah, so I'm showing everybody the label here. It has a eagle.
Exactly, it's got an eagle, which is all part of our crest. So if you turn the bottle around, you should be able to see at the back there is a crest on the back of the bottle, which is an eagle sitting on a pile of rocks. And so we've used that emblem, our crest, to create the wine. So it's got an eagle, and then we go from that wine to our reserve wines, which actually just takes one feather from that eagle. So we're trying to link the two wines together. Again, this wine can be drunk on its own, but obviously it's much more of a food wine. It's crying out for a nice steak or some chicken or anything, but it will get better in the bottle. You know, it will last 5 years or more. You can lay it down. It doesn't have to be drunk straight away, but it's delicious.
That's the technical word that I would use for this wine.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sophia, any input in there? Did your brother get it?
I think. I mean, it's a real go-to one. I mean, it's as my brother said, it's our kind of most important wine in the whole of our portfolio, and I think it's what's so good about the wine. It's incredibly versatile. So it goes with many dishes. It goes with fish. It goes meatier fish, obviously. It goes with all types of meats and cheeses. It also goes very well with spice, and spice is quite hard to match. So it's a wine that is very versatile. And we have had a huge amount of success with it.
Yeah, I think the wine for me is interesting, and I agree with Philip. We're digging this out of the cell a little early here. I think it's got the stuffing to last, certainly medium-term aging. What I'm getting and what tells me that is that I get that rich, plush fruit, textured fruit in the front, and then I get spice and tannin and acidity that kind of like start creeping in. And it seems juicy and open knit, but then it closes with some structure. And once those two things start integrating and kind of everything relaxes, I think you'll see some more complexity pop out and a little bit more rounded profile on that wine.
I agree entirely, Lee. Ideally, you should leave it in a cellar for a few years before you crack open the bottle. However, not everyone can lay down wines, and it is approachable at a young age as well.
For sure. I'm enjoying it here. And you mentioned steak. I think we're cooking steak here in Chicago tonight, and this is going to pair right with it. So terrific.
I'm feeling hungry.
Well, you're way ahead of us. What time do you have?
Well, it's kind of 8:30, at least. So we have to keep going.
Yeah,
Well,
we're having a barbecue as well.
Yeah.
We're different parts of England, but we're both having barbecues, making the most of the good weather.
Excellent. Let's so 2/3 of your production is on these dry table wines. So your focus really is on these wines. And you can find all three of what we talked about, the Reserve, the Estate, and the Douro in the market. Certainly reach out to us at Wine Cellars through our Facebook page if you're interested in finding them out there. We also have some white wine, but we're going to move on and talk about the ports. And maybe I can pull up the presentation. We'll talk about the difference in terms of production and taste two different styles. And we'll get to some questions. I saw a question out there from Mr. Keith Livingston, our partner down there in Texas and Houston, who was asking about foot trotting. So I think that's coming up next. So I'm going to pull up some slides, and you two can hash out what the production method and maybe a little background or history on port, how it came to be, and what you guys are doing with it.
Port. The history around port is there's a lot of sort of myth and hearsay of how port really started. But obviously my sister can correct me, but my understanding is it was two English traders who came across this wine called Pinhão during the days of the Napoleonic Wars, where all the ports in Spain and in France were blockaded, and England needed to get some wine or some alcoholic beverage for its people. And so Portugal was on the side of England in those days. And so they came across this wine called Pinhão, which was sweet and fortified to make sure that it could undertake the shipping from Portugal all the way to England. There is also a story that port was by coincidence invented when a ship carrying brandy and wine hit a storm, and the barrels broke and mixed together and formed port when they collected it from the bilges of the boat. However, that doesn't really sort of justify a sweet wine. I think it's just more sort of hearsay and a nice story.
Very romantic.
So the demarked region for port, which is what Lee just had up, is the oldest demarked region in the world by Baron Forrester in the 1700s, marked out that area for demarked for port only. And port has to be grown on schist soil. And so therefore there are certain areas which you can see on the map where it's not colored pink. And these tend to be granite outcrops where you cannot grow port. And again, another story, it was always, if you could hear the oars of the boat on the river, Douro, then you were in the port growing region. But obviously, with modern technology, you actually have to have an actual marking of the region. You can't just rely on your hearing.
So let's talk about the production, what the special production methods are in granite lagars and foot trotting, and why that's done and what the process is, why that needs to be done. So I'll get up here a slide on your granite lagars that are in your Quinta, and why we're jumping around on the grapes like Lucille Ball.
Just a sort of 101 on sort of port. Port is a fortified wine. It means that when the grapes arrive, we have to ferment the grapes and we measure the sugar content. And when the sugar content reaches a certain level, we have to draw off the juice and add brandy, which will kill the yeast, and the remaining product will be sweet and alcoholic. So for port, we do not add any yeast. It's natural wild yeast on the grape skins. And it means that we have a limited amount of time between when the grapes arrive and when we pull off the must to fortify it with alcohol. It means that if we are having fermentation tanks on pump overs like table wine, we wouldn't be able to get the necessary extraction in the short period. With table wine, we are fermenting for up to 2 weeks, pumping over. We can then leave the skins on the wine for as long as we want. With port, we can't do that. And so these tanks, we need to get the maximum extraction out from the grape skins without breaking the pip. And it happens that the foot and granite is a very good way of doing that. People have tried mechanizing this with mannequins' feet and silicon and etc. But at the end of the day, the old traditional method of foot on granite is the best way of extracting the colors and the phenols and the flavors.
So we don't just do it to have fun and to get our guests to join in, but that's also a good part of it as well.
Well, it looks like they're having fun there, although I bet it is after doing it for 5 or 10 minutes, it becomes real work.
It sure is. And in the old days, people who were picking and carrying the grapes during the day, and then they trod at night. So it was a very, very long day. Nowadays, we get, it looks like the kind of football team there. Nowadays, in fact, we get locals who actually enjoy it. I mean, last couple of years, we've got the tour guides who come and give everyone tours of the winery, and they have really made it great fun. There's some rather pretty girls who get into the lagars now. So it's a way of enjoying as well as hard work.
Yeah, and Keith was asking about foot trotting. So obviously, all the ports, or most of the ports, all the ports, or most of the ports.
Most, not all. It depends. I would hate to say all the ports because it all depends on the logistics of the vintage, but definitely all our top quality ports, and some of the rubies get foot trodden.
Right, and all the reserve wines as well.
Yeah, all the reserve wines just get trodden for a day, and then they're transferred into stainless steel vats to start the fermentation. George winemaker is a great believer in using the lagars. He feels that the larger surface area of the grape juice to grape skin is very important before the fermentation starts. I don't want to get too technical here, but it's a good thing.
Yeah, we've actually covered that with some of our other suppliers using different shaped fermenters. So hopefully our viewership is somewhat familiar with that. We mentioned that after this 5-day or so fermentation process and trotting, we're shocking the must with brandy, and that ceases fermentation. You have the remaining natural residual sugar that will be in the finished wine at that point, and then you send them into barrel for aging.
That's right. And we tend to stop the fermentation a little bit later. And because we have these fantastic grapes with this freshness and minerality, our ports tend to be a little bit drier than most ports. I mean, they're still sweet. And port has to be between 19 and 21% alcohol. So you can't have a low alcohol port. But people do tell us that our ports are very much in balance and have a good elegance. And often they say that we produce wine lovers ports. So for those people who are a little bit unsure about whether they like port, do try Quinta De La Rosa. Our house style is very different.
Yeah, drier house style. So I have a couple more images before we taste the tawny and the ruby that are on our agenda today. We'll talk about two different barrel shapes here. You see the tunnels and the pipes being the smaller 500 liter.
That's right. The pipes traditionally were the way that the port was transported down to Vila Nova de Gaia, Porto, on the boats, and those were the barrels. And up until quite recently, people used to say, how big is your quinta? How big is your farm, your estate, your domain? And people used to reply in how many pipes the estate produced. So it wasn't how many hectares, how many bottles, how many liters. It was pipes. And traditionally, a pipe of port is what fathers used to usually leave to their godsons, not many goddaughters, used to get a pipe of port laid down for their christening present. Nice christening present. Not
bad, not bad. Not quite as good as getting Quinta De La Rosa as your grandmother got, but
yeah, well, she was lucky.
He was lucky. And here's another picture of the larger size barrels. And I think when we talk about the tawny and the ruby, we'll talk about the different barrel sizes. And the smaller the barrel, it means that there's more surface area to liquid ratio. Therefore, the wines age a little quicker than in the larger barrels. And so this is nice demonstrative imagery for that conversation that'll happen next.
And then additionally, we're not trying to get any flavors of oak. So these barrels are not necessarily oak. They can be chestnut, walnut, any wood which doesn't have an inherent flavor. So we're not trying to get an oak flavor. It's unlike wine.
Right. Good point. So let's taste some tawny and talk about stylistically. There's so many different styles of port. It gets very confusing, but I think it breaks down into a ruby or fresh style versus a tawny aged style. And I'll let you guys take over from there.
Thank you. One of the things you might notice are the bottles that we use, the 50 cl bottles. Actually, I'm pouring the wrong one to begin with. I'm pouring the ruby, sorry. Let me just change that. These 500 ml bottles have been very successful. And that's really the reason why we're working with wine cellars today, because Jordan Sager found our bottles to be a very good way of selling port. And then when he opened a bottle and found out the quality, I think that sealed the deal, so to speak. So the first port is the tawny port, which is a much it's much less fruity. So tawnies and rubies, the difference is ruby tends to be more fruity. You've got more dark black cherry flavors coming through, while tawny ports tend to be slightly more kind of honey nut flavors. Both of them are blends of years. So like champagne, these ports that are called rubies or tawnies, they come from a mixture of different years. So they will be the same every time you try them. And they're also ports not to be aged. You buy a bottle of port, unless it's a vintage port, you buy a bottle of port really to drink now. And I think sometimes people are a bit confused about this. So the tawnies, I love the tawnies because they have this slightly kind of caramelized honey nut flavors to them. And in the summer months, we actually serve our tawnies chilled, and they make a very good digestif as well as an aperitif. And they are stored in the smaller barrels, the pipes, to get more wood aging. Philip, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you've summed it up. But I think the ports don't have to be served at room temperature. And when you got taught to the ruby, I think the ruby's the same. You don't have to serve the ruby at room temperature. Actually, in France, rubies are drunk as an aperitif, and it's one of the biggest port markets in the world, and it's all drunk as aperitif. So we can always sort of think, in history, we always thought it's a digestif, but it could be an aperitif. Plus, it can also be used as into cocktails as well. There's a big trend of making port-style cocktails, both with the ruby and the tawny.
And wine cellars, if I remember, made a very good, in Washington, D.C., a fantastic tawny cocktail. And it was with tawny bourbon, tonic water, Angostura bitters, and a slice of orange peel. It's absolutely delicious. And we serve it at La Rosa.
My favorite port cocktail is, if you can see here, Lucy, our friend from Texas, who's been watching a few of our Facebook Live videos. She asked, do they make a white port? And this is my favorite port cocktail. You guys do make a white port. And tell us a little bit about a white port cocktail and why that's about.
Over to you, Philip.
Well, I mean, it's named after Sophia and the Sophia sling, which is in, first of all, to answer the question, yes, we do make white port. White port tends to be drier style, especially for ours. So it's a dry style white port rather than a sweet white port. So the sugar content is lower, but it's still 20% alcohol. And the white, or the Sophia sling, as it was named, is a port tonic. So we add port, white port, in a higher ratio than you would gin, because it's a lower alcohol than gin, and tonic water, either with a slice of lemon. You can put mint, you can put rosemary. There's lots of additions you can add into the cocktail. Absolutely delicious on a hot summer's day. And actually, we're in lockdown in England, not being able to go to Portugal at the moment. And I've been drinking the white port tonics or the Sophia slings on a regular basis.
They are really good, and it's a pity that the world has come to a halt at the moment, but because this summer was going to be the summer of the white port and tonic, but we're drinking plenty of it, so it's a very, very good drink. And not only that, but white port on its own is particularly delicious. And Philip and my father used to love his white port and roasted almonds on the terrace at La Rosa.
Wow. And with that view too.
Yeah.
Terrific. Just for the wine geek out there, I don't know how many wine geeks out there, hopefully a few, but your white port has about 60 to 80 grams of RS, which is half to 2/3 of what you have in the regular ports.
Yeah, on the dry side.
Yes, on the dry side. So our sort of tawny ports are about 90 grams. Our 10-year-old tawny ports are about 90 grams residual sugars, and our white ports will be in the 50s to 60s level.
Right. Let's taste the ruby next. And
okay, so here goes the ruby. My father particularly liked the ruby, didn't he, Philip? With cake, and it is. I think often with a ruby port, people tend to think of ruby as the cheapest port, and it's the port that is the supermarket port. Our ruby is really extraordinary. It's a ruby reserve, but more than that, it's made from A-graded grapes, and there are very, very few rubies that are made from such high quality grapes. And it's got the most incredible complexity and intensity. Just by looking at the color, it's a very, very dark red color for a ruby. As is our tawny, actually. Our tawny is also quite dark in color. And that's because of the quality of the grapes that we use. We really shouldn't be making a ruby out of these grapes. But Tim, our father, just when we started over 30 years ago, he said, I want to be a port house where we make all the ports. We make the rubies and the tawnies all the way through to the vintage. And this is a really serious ruby. And I challenge anyone to find a ruby that is of quite the same quality. It's got this incredible complexity. It's kind of mouth-filling, full of fruit and vibrancy, with a tiny bit of kind of licorice and everything at the end. But it is extraordinary. It is, as many people have said to me, too good to be a ruby.
And especially on the alcohol. The alcohol is really melded into the fruit. You don't get any burn, which you do get with cheaper ruby ports. This is a really integrated product. And, George spends just as much time making the ruby as he does the tawny. He wants to get it right as well.
Loaded with, for me, it's loaded with spice, but the fruit profile is just so pretty. It's blueberries and blackberries and boysenberry, kind of this purpley blue arena of darker fruit.
But with freshness, a lot of rubies tend to be, as my brother said, either very spirity or very sweet, cloyingly sweet, a little bit like cough medicine. But there's a brightness on this ruby. It kind of makes you want to smile. I mean, it's a fun ruby. It's not hugely complex and serious compared to our other ports, but I love it. And we often, again in the summer, will chill these ports and drink them straight from the fridge.
Wow, such complexity in the length of it and continuing lingering spice. You talked about your father liked to pair cake with it?
He loved his just ordinary sponge cake with the ruby, but you can actually drink it as aperitif. Again, it's very good for a cocktail mix. But I like the ruby because it's a kind of, dare I say it, a lunchtime port or a summer port where you can actually serve it on the rocks. It's a port you can celebrate it rather than being too serious. Vintage ports, you have to decant them and be quite serious about them, and they're beautiful in their own right. But I love this port because of its fun ability.
Yeah, let's take the stodginess out. We don't have to be old men around a fireplace with a cigar drinking port, do we? I don't think so.
Absolutely not. I'm not.
And you can also use it in the kitchen for making sauces as well. It's a very, very versatile. So it's not just for drinking. You can use it for cooking.
Or also matching with food, because I mean, in Denmark, the Danes drink a lot of port, and they often will drink port with their main meal. And I sometimes think it's rather sad port's relegated to either the digestif or aperitif. The French, who, by the way, are the largest consumers of port worldwide, will drink the ruby as an aperitif. But the Danes will quite happily drink this port with a steak, with game, with venison, with any kind of big meat. Actually, I might take it now and try it with a barbecue. I think with grilled meat, it could be good.
Yeah, it works.
I think another thing that gets overlooked and a lot of consumers ask me about is how long can we store these wines? And port has an advantage that it will last a lot longer than other wines because of the higher alcohol and because of the sugar and acidity. But really the sugar and the alcohol is a natural preservative that you could drink however much you wanted. If you didn't finish the whole bottle, which I would challenge anybody to try to do, it's not probably what you want to do. But you could put that in your fridge and it'll probably keep for a week or two, depending on the style, at least a week or two. And some of the
more. A tawny you can keep for a couple of months.
Yeah, I was going to say the 20-year tawny might last, a lot longer. So don't feel the need to try to consume 500 milliliters of port with by yourself or plus one. It's probably leads to a more difficult morning, but it's hard not to because of the freshness, the drier style, and the total drinkability that's here and the quality that's in these introductory bottles. Again, $18 to $20 for a 500 ml bottle of estate-produced A-rated tawnies and rubies is just a fantastic value too.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Great. Did you want to add anything in here? I'm going to look for some more questions from Facebook land, but did we miss anything?
Well, I hope that people will come and visit us again when they can, because we had a lot of American visitors coming over the last few years, and we do live in a very, very special place. We're very rural. It's a very safe country. The Portuguese are incredibly welcoming. And we do hope we'll see you in the future. Not just you, Lee, but everyone out there.
Yeah, I think it's important.
And when you do come across, we've also now produced our own beer. So we're not exporting it yet, but we're producing our own beer, a La Rosa beer.
Well done. Yep.
So that will be available in Portugal. And you never know, it might appear in the US at some point.
That would be fun. That would be a fun project. But in the video, we kind of touched quickly upon the fact that you do have rooms, cabanas, and other lodging that you have on site. That's right there in the heart of what we were looking at.
We have 25 rooms, and people can come and stay and really feel like they're part of the vineyard. It's quite a wonderful experience, especially in September. They can come and tread the port and really get involved in the harvest. And as I said, we're right in the center of the port wine region, so we have that. We also have a very good restaurant, and we do tours and tastings every day. So it's a good place to visit.
Yeah, the restaurant was amazing. It had I was fortunate enough to dine there at least a couple times. It used all your Portuguese ingredients with a modern kind of culinary twist to it. For the sake of brevity and try to focus on the wines, I kind of took out some of those images, but another modern facility there is your tasting room. Which people can come and visit if they don't want to spend the time to go stay overnight with you guys.
Absolutely, we welcome visits, and Philip and I are often there, and we like to see people.
Well, it was great having you join us here today. We could join virtually, and
yes. Thank you.
As soon as it loosens up, we'll be over there in the Douro Valley looking at UNESCO World Heritage sites and drinking ports as aperitifs or maybe with our barbecue. So I want to thank you guys for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers to you guys, and cheers to our friends out there that are watching with us here today. So everybody be safe. Have a glass of Douro Valley Red and some fortified wines with your barbecue. And we'll see you again soon.
Take care. Thanks very much, Lee.
Thanks,
Cheers,
Lee.
bye.
Bye.
How'd it go?
Just wait.